Day 700 being Christopher Cruz. So I'm at Starbucks and I was reading my book Activate Heaven, so it's called. I always forget the name of it. And I'm reading it, and this guy was sitting like two seats over from me. He starts to get up, and he looks at me and he smiles. I smile at him, and I go back, and then he like waves his hand over to me, and I'm like, take my headphones off, and he just starts talking to me, like just out of nowhere. He's like this old like Hispanic guy, and he starts talking to me about like psychology and life, and I'm like sitting there and I'm like, okay, Chris, just be humble and listen to what he's saying, because he's saying like a lot of things that I know that I teach, things that are pretty common for me to hear because it's stuff that I've taught or coached people on. But I'm like, hey, this, like, you can learn something from everyone, so just humble yourself and listen. He just kept going and going and going, and then he would stop and then just smile and just stare at me, and it was kind of awkward. And I was just like, okay. And he's like, what do you think? And then I was just like, it was like, what is he trying to get to? What's the point of this? And then he starts talking about the only thing that we need in life is food, shelter, and water. And when he said that, I was like thinking, I was like, no, we don't only need food, shelter, and water. Like with food, shelter, and water, yeah, we can survive, but we need food, shelter, water, and God is what I was thinking. But I didn't say anything, and he kept going, and he's talking about all this stuff, and he's talking about all these celebrities and the money they have, and like Kobe Bryant had 6 rings, but when he died, he didn't get to take any of them with him. And he's saying all this stuff, and then he asked me, what book am I reading? And I show him Activate Heaven, and it's about using your voice and the gift that God has given you to make a difference in the world. And it's interesting, his whole vibe changed after that. His whole vibe changed, dang. And I started to feel this like anxious energy. Like I just felt it was like so strong. And I was just like, before he even really said anything, I just got all this anxiety, and I'm like, this is not the person to talk to about this. And so it's interesting, like the whole conversation, he's talking and he's saying, a lot of things that I already know, mostly things that I already know, but I was just being like, okay. And then he starts talking about God after that, and how he doesn't really believe in God, and if Jesus does exist, then when he goes to heaven, he's gonna say, "Hey, Jesus, like, you gave me free will. Like you said I could do whatever I want, so I did whatever I want. Like, you gonna be mad at me for that? You're supposed to be love." And I was just like, wow. And that's when I started to be much more bold. And we had a conversation about God that lasted about 2 minutes before he got up and left. It was like he talked forever about psychology, and he's a professor of psychology, and he's a speaker, and just like talking to me about we don't need anything but food and water and shelter, and that's all we need in life, and we don't need anything else. He was just going on and on and on and on, and then we bring up God, and he's saying the way he lives, and I'm like, that's a dangerous way to live, but you do your thing. And then 2 minutes later, he gets his stuff and he's out of there. So it was a really interesting experience. It was like, like I was trying to learn from him, but I didn't get the best energy from him. And then when we started talking about God, he was out. So it was just like, interesting. And it was really interesting for me to see that I become the most bold and the most assertive when like I'm talking about God. Like all the things he was saying, like I could tell him all those things. Like great, like this is, psychology 101. Like I get it, I get it, I get it. Like understanding all that. But I was still like, I wasn't saying anything. I was like, oh yeah, yeah, okay. But then when he starts talking about God, that's when I boom jump in. And so that's just interesting how talking about God brings out that bold, assertive version of me, that like fearless version of me. And yeah, as soon as I did, he was out of there. He grabbed his stuff and he left, which is so interesting because I just was messaging my mom maybe 30 minutes before that, 20 minutes before that. I said, Mom, if you the Bible says if you resist the devil, he will flee. And I started resisting his perspective on God, and he left. So who knows? Who knows what that was? But yeah, it's just a very random experience, but it was very helpful for me to see, like, okay, I can keep my mouth shut when people are talking about most things, but when you talk about God, like, nope, I'm not going to keep my mouth shut. I'm not going to be quiet. That's when the bold, assertive version of me is going to come out. So that was good. Very good learning experience.